Elena often thought of her childhood in fragments, as though the years had been torn into pieces and scattered by some careless hand. One fragment would show her laughing barefoot through the dusty streets of her neighborhood, another holding her mother's hand on the way to the market, another reading stories under the mango tree while cicadas buzzed in the heat of summer. These memories glowed with innocence and safety. But then came 12. She could never explain why it began then, why her body seemed to awaken to a force so much greater than her small frame could contain. It was as if an invisible fire had been lit inside her belly, smoldering and restless, whispering things she did not understand. While other girls still clutched dolls and whispered about crushes from a safe distance, Elena's thoughts began to twist in ways she was ashamed to voice. It started with the dreams. At first, they were faint shadowy figures that brushed against her in sleep, voices that left her waking with a racing heart and damp sheets. She thought it was ordinary, the way children sometimes dream strange things. But the dreams grew sharper, more insistent. She would wake trembling, her pulse beating in her throat, her hands clenched against her chest as though trying to stop the strange hunger that gnawed at her. She told no one. How could she? Her mother was a stern woman, sharp-eyed and quick to discipline. Her father was distant, forever preoccupied with work and village politics. And her friends, the girls in her school uniform who still laughed at cartoons and braiding one another's hair, would never understand. Already she felt herself drifting from them, though she smiled and played as if nothing had changed. It was not only the dreams. Her body began betraying her in the daylight too. A fleeting glance from a boy, the brush of someone's hand as they passed her exercise book in class, even the smell of chalk dust clinging to the teacher's clothes, all of it seemed to stir that restless fire inside her. At 12 years old, she felt emotions and desires that belonged to women twice her age, yet she had none of their wisdom or words to contain them. At church, she trembled during sermons about purity. The preacher would pound the pulpit and cry about fornication and lust, and Elena would bow her head low, certain that everyone could see through her. Was this what sin felt like, to be trapped in a body that betrayed holy teachings? She prayed in whispers at night, asking God to take it away, to let her be like the other girls who talked only of schoolwork and harmless crushes. But each prayer seemed to vanish unanswered into the ceiling. The secrecy became her shadow. She grew skilled at hiding her turmoil, smiling when spoken to, excelling in her studies, pretending that nothing was wrong. But deep inside, she carried the weight of a secret she believed too shameful to reveal. When other girls talked of their first periods and their mother's advice, Elena remained silent. How could she tell them that her real terror was not blood, but fire, this unrelenting fire that made her body ache for things she did not yet fully understand? There was one afternoon she never forgot. She was walking home from school, books clutched to her chest, when she saw a group of boys kicking a ball by the roadside. One of them, tall and gangly, smiled at her. Just a smile, innocent, fleeting. But it was enough. A wave of heat surged through her, so strong that she stumbled and almost dropped her books. The shame of it was unbearable. She ran the rest of the way home, tears blurring her vision, her chest tight with self-disgust. That night, she lay awake and whispered into the darkness. Why me? She began to believe she was cursed. Perhaps some unseen hand had marked her, punishing her for sins she had never committed. In her culture, whispers of curses, generational spirits, and dark legacies lingered in every household. Had her grandmother done something terrible long ago? Was she carrying the punishment of forgotten ancestors? The thought terrified her, yet it also gave her a name for the chaos inside her: the curse of 12. It grew worse as months passed. She avoided sleep when she could, terrified of the dreams, yet exhaustion always dragged her under eventually. Her friends noticed her restlessness, her distracted laughter. Teachers praised her intelligence but scolded her for drifting during lessons. Her mother, preoccupied with household chores and the constant struggle of providing, barely noticed the change beyond murmuring that Elena was becoming moody like a woman too soon. Elena carried her secret in silence, and silence became her prison. Sometimes, when she sat alone, she wondered if anyone else felt this way. Did the other girls hide it as well, behind their chatter about songs and movies? Was there some unspoken rule that everyone obeyed? Pretend it isn't there, smile, and keep moving? Or was she truly alone in this, a solitary outcast in her own skin? At 12, she was too young to act fully on the cravings, yet not too young to feel their full weight. She began testing boundaries without realizing it, standing too close to boys in class, lingering too long when a hand brushed hers. The guilt that followed was sharp and merciless. She began to keep count in her mind. How many times she had sinned that day, how many impure thoughts, how many moments of weakness. Each night the tally crushed her, and each morning she promised herself she would do better. But she never did. On her 13th birthday, while others celebrated with soft drinks and music, Elena slipped away from the party and sat alone by the mango tree. The laughter of cousins and neighbors rang in the distance, but she hugged her knees to her chest and felt nothing but dread. If 12 had been so heavy, what would 13 bring? Would the curse grow stronger with every year, binding her tighter in chains she could not break? That was when she made a silent vow: no one must ever know. If she could not rid herself of this fire, then she would bury it, hide it so deeply that even those closest to her could not suspect. She would wear a mask of normalcy, smiling, studying, playing, and doing all the right things. Perhaps if she wore the mask long enough, it would become real. But masks have cracks, and fire always finds a way through. As she walked back toward the sounds of her birthday celebration, Elena did not know that this secret would shape every step of her journey, that the curse of 12 would follow her into the ghost years, into the arms of strangers, into the pews of churches, and into the shadows of her own heart. For now, she was only a girl, clutching her secret, already weary from carrying it, already desperate for freedom she could not yet name. And so, Elena's childhood ended, not with a gradual fading, but with a sudden rupture, a dividing line etched by a fire that refused to die. By the time Elena turned 16, the secret she had named the Curse of 12 had already become the invisible hand steering her life. What began as unsettling dreams and awkward awakenings had grown into patterns she could neither resist nor understand. Her school days blurred into a routine of quiet rebellion. She was still one of the brightest students in class, but her focus wavered, her gaze too often distracted by the curve of a smile, the accidental touch of a shoulder. The fire inside her demanded to be fed, and no amount of prayer or whispered promises to God could silence it. The first time she kissed a boy, it was not out of love or affection. It happened behind the school library, a hurried and clumsy collision of lips with a senior student who had noticed her nervous glances. The kiss meant little to him, a small conquest to brag about to friends. But for Elena, it unlocked something dangerous, a realization that the fire within her could be momentarily quieted through touch. From then on, she chased moments like that in secret. A kiss in the back of a classroom, a lingering embrace at a friend's birthday party, stolen encounters that left her dizzy with both relief and shame. Each time, she promised herself it would be the last. Each time, she broke the promise. By 18, Elena's world had become a blur of faces. She could barely remember the names of some of the men she had been with. They came and went like shadow strangers who filled a hunger, but left behind only emptiness. She became skilled at separating her heart from her body, offering one while locking away the other. The boys and young men believed she was bold, adventurous, perhaps even liberated. They could not see the turmoil in her eyes when she turned away. Her friends began to notice. "Elena, you're always with someone," they teased. "Don't you ever want a break?" She laughed it off, but their words stung. She envied them their slow, innocent romances, their ability to attach meaning to a single handhold or shared secret. For her, everything burned too quickly, consumed before it could grow into something lasting. She drifted untethered, unable to hold on to love even when she wanted to. Her parents never spoke of it, though her mother sometimes frowned at the way men's eyes lingered when Elena walked past. "You must learn restraint," her mother scolded once, though she could not name what exactly needed restraining. Elena nodded, pretending to understand, while inside she felt only the sharp edge of shame. It was during these years that she began to think of herself as a ghost. She moved from one body to another, from one embrace to the next, never staying long enough to be truly seen. Her life was filled with moments of intensity, but devoid of permanence. She could be the center of a man's desire one night and forgotten by morning. And she too forgot faces blurred, names slipped from her memory, as though her mind refused to hold on to them. There was one man she remembered, though not because he was special, but because of the way he left her. His name was Michael, a university student who recited poetry and promised her devotion. For weeks, Elena allowed herself to believe him, to imagine a future different from the shadows. But one evening, after they had been together, he looked at her with sudden disgust. "You're insatiable," he muttered. "There's something wrong with you." The words pierced deeper than she let him see. She laughed in his face, tossing her hair as though his opinion meant nothing. But later, alone in her room, she wept until her throat was raw. "There's something wrong with you," the words became an echo, repeating in her mind, joining the chorus of her own doubts. It was true, wasn't it? Other women could balance love and desire, but she was consumed by it. Men approached her with eagerness, but sooner or later they all recoiled, sensing that what she carried was not passion but hunger, endless and unsatisfied. The ghost years stretched on. She finished secondary school and moved to the city for further studies. The city offered anonymity, and with anonymity came freedom. No watchful neighbors, no gossiping aunts, no stern church elders. She could slip into the arms of strangers without fear of scandal. Clubs, parties, dimly lit hostels, they became her escape routes. Yet even in the city, she felt hollow. Surrounded by noise and laughter, Elena felt herself drifting further away from everyone else. She envied couples she saw walking hand in hand, laughing softly at private jokes. She wanted not just bodies but belonging. But whenever someone tried to get close to her heart, she sabotaged it. She would disappear, refuse calls, vanish into another embrace. There were mornings when she stared at herself in the mirror, makeup smudged, eyes heavy with exhaustion, and whispered, "Who are you becoming?" The reflection never answered. The ghost years were not only about men. They were about absence of identity, of connection, of peace. Elena moved like smoke, visible but impossible to grasp. To the world, she was adventurous, reckless, perhaps even admired. Inside, she was lonely, terrified that she would never be free from the fire that consumed her. And so she lived year after year, shadow after shadow, hunger after hunger, until the day she crossed paths with the first of the pastors. That encounter would mark the beginning of another chapter, one that would test not only her body but her soul. But for now, in the long silence of her ghost years, Elena drifted unseen, untouched where it mattered, searching without knowing what she was searching for. If the ghost years had left Elena hollow, then the years that followed drew her into a different kind of emptiness, one clothed in scripture, cloaked in the language of holiness. It began, as many things in her life did, almost by accident. She had been invited to a revival service by a friend. The city church was alive with lights, music, and fervent prayers. The air seemed to vibrate with expectation. People danced, cried, lifted hands to heaven, speaking in tongues that poured out like rivers. Elena sat in the crowd, restless as always, half listening to the sermon. The pastor preaching that night was a man of charisma. He spoke with the fire of conviction, his voice rising and falling like a seasoned storyteller. People wept at his words, rushed to the altar, fell trembling to the floor. Elena watched, unimpressed at first, until his eyes caught hers. Just a glance, but it lingered. It pierced her in a way she knew too well. That was how it began. The first pastor she fell into was a man twice her age, revered by his congregation, known for his eloquence and his anointing. To the world, he was a man of God. To Elena, he became a secret companion. He invited her for private counseling sessions after service. They prayed together at first, his hand lightly resting on her shoulder. But prayers soon turned into confessions, and confessions turned into touch. When he kissed her for the first time, it felt both shocking and inevitable. She had seen desire in his eyes long before his lips touched hers. And when the act was done, both of them breathless, he whispered, "God understands. The flesh is weak, but grace abounds." Elena left that encounter torn. Part of her was thrilled not simply because of the intimacy, but because she had power. Here was a man revered as holy, undone by her presence. But another part of her felt the familiar hollow ache. Even in his arms, she was not seen for who she truly was. She was merely a vessel for his weakness, a shadow of his secret sin. It did not end with him. One by one, different pastors crossed her path. Each claimed to be strong, disciplined, and righteous until the fire in her eyes drew out the cracks in their facades. The second was younger, vibrant, a rising star in his denomination. He spoke endlessly of revival, of purity, of resisting temptation. Yet after a late-night prayer vigil, he drove her home, his hand straying to her thigh. By the time they reached her hostel, there was no pretense left. The sermon of purity had given way to whispered apologies tangled in sheets. The third came not from pursuit, but from her own desperation. After months of guilt and exhaustion, Elena sought deliverance. She went to a healing service, knelt at the altar, and wept openly. "Pray for me," she begged. "I am bound. Something is wrong with me." The pastor laid hands on her, prayed with authority, rebuked spirits. But afterward he lingered. He told her she was beautiful even in her brokenness. Within weeks, he too had fallen another man of God reduced to a man of desire. The fourth was the most shocking. He was older, respected, with a reputation for humility. Elena had not pursued him, nor he her not at first. But after a conference where she volunteered as a choir member, he sought her out. His words were gentle, almost fatherly, until they weren't. What began as guidance became secret meetings, coded text messages, hotel rooms outside the city. She knew she should have stopped it. He knew he should have resisted. Yet neither of them did. By the time Elena was 24, she had been with 4 pastors, 4 men who carried the title of shepherd, yet had been led astray by her shadowed hunger. And still, she felt nothing but emptiness. The thrill that came with the first moments, the rush of being desired, of breaking through the armor of men who claimed holiness, always faded. What lingered was shame. She would stare at herself in the mirror, wondering if she was some kind of curse, not only upon herself but upon others. Was I born to destroy? She asked herself this more times than she could count. Each time she thought she had reached the bottom of her guilt, another layer revealed itself. She was not only ruining her own chance at peace, she was exposing the hypocrisy of men trusted by entire congregations. Yet they kept returning, and she kept answering, because the fire inside her refused to die. At night, her dreams tormented her. Sometimes she saw herself chained in a dark room, faceless men reaching out for her. Other times she saw herself standing in a church, naked, while the congregation stared and the pastors turned their faces away in shame. She would wake gasping, drenched in sweat, desperate to believe she was more than the sum of her sins. But how could she believe that, when every time she reached for help, help became entangled with desire? Elena began to resent the very sight of pulpits, the thunder of sermons, the hollow repetitions of God is faithful, from lips that had tasted her. Faith had once been a fragile hope for her, a whisper that perhaps God could save her from the curse. Now it felt like a stage where hypocrisy played its loudest notes. And yet deep inside she longed for freedom. For all her rebellion, for all her hunger, she still prayed. Some nights, curled into herself, she whispered desperate words into the silence. God, I don't want this life. Please, make me whole. Show me who I am beyond this. But the answers never came, or at least not yet. The pastor's fall was a turning point, though she could not see it at the time. It was not just about seduction or hypocrisy. It was the moment Elena realized that even those who claimed holiness were as broken as she was. That realization both shattered her and, in some hidden way, began to awaken her. Because if they too could fall, then maybe her fall was not the end. Maybe brokenness was not a curse, but a condition of humanity itself. Still, in those years, she could not embrace that thought. She saw only her shadow, only her guilt, only the endless cycle of desire and regret. It would take another kind of man, a different kind of pastor, to shift her story toward hope. But until he appeared, Elena walked through a wilderness of secrets, carrying the weight of both her own fire and the shame of men who had sworn to lead others away from sin. The curse of 12 still burned. The ghost years still echoed. And the pastor's fall had deepened the shadows of her soul. Hello guys, if you're enjoying our videos, please take a moment to follow, subscribe to our channel to stay updated on our upcoming stories. Thank you. Let's continue with our story about Elena. By the time Elena met him, she no longer trusted churches. The revival tents, the packed auditoriums, the sound of voices rising in prayer, all of it made her wary. Behind every pulpit she saw not holiness but weakness, not salvation but appetite. She had been touched, prayed for, promised freedom by men who later touched her in ways that had nothing to do with God. So when her cousin invited her to another midweek service, Elena almost refused. Not again, she muttered. All pastors are the same. But something in her cousin's eyes held a quiet conviction. Just come. If nothing changes, at least you tried. He's different. The word lingered in Elena's mind. Different. She went. The church was smaller than the massive cathedrals she had grown used to. No blinding lights, no booming sound system, no exaggerated show of miracles. Just wooden benches, the faint scent of candle wax, and a handful of people singing softly. It felt less like a performance and more like a gathering of wounded souls hoping for balm. Then he walked in. He was not as young as the rising stars who drew crowds with their charisma, nor as old as the seasoned bishops whose names commanded respect. He looked ordinary. His shirt was plain, his Bible worn, his face calm. But there was something in his eyes, something steady, searching, kind. When he spoke, his voice carried not fire, but warmth. His sermon that evening was not about demons or lust or punishment. It was about brokenness. Every heart, he said gently, carries wounds. Some are visible, others are hidden. But God does not despise the wounded. He draws near to the brokenhearted. He binds up their scars, not with condemnation, but with love. Elena sat frozen. His words slid past her defenses, reaching the raw places she had hidden for years. She felt exposed, yet not ashamed. For the first time, a pastor's words did not sound like accusations. They sounded like an invitation. When the service ended, she lingered. Her cousin introduced her, and he smiled, not the hungry smile she had grown used to, but a simple acknowledgement, as though he saw her not as a body, but as a person. "Elena," he said, repeating her name softly. "I'm glad you came." Something cracked inside her. Their next meeting was during a prayer session he held for those who struggled with addictions. Elena almost laughed at the irony. Addiction wasn't that exactly what she was, a slave to a hunger she couldn't master? When she told him her story, haltingly, eyes lowered in shame, she waited for the familiar shift, the flicker of desire, the subtle hints, the crossing of boundaries. But it never came. He listened, really listened, not just to her words, but to the trembling underneath them. When she finished, he did not rebuke her or spiritualize her pain. He said only, "You've carried this alone for too long. You are not cursed, Elena. You are not beyond love." Her throat tightened. No one had ever told her that. Then he prayed for her. It was not the thunderous, dramatic deliverance she had seen before. No shouting, no pushing, no theatrics. His prayer was steady, tender, as though he was speaking to both God and her wounded heart at once. "Father," he said softly, "Elena is yours. You see her fire. You see her hunger. You know her better than she knows herself. Where she feels cursed, show her she is loved. Where she feels bound, show her she can be free. Wrap her in the truth that she is not defined by her struggle, but by your compassion." Elena wept. Not the tears of guilt that had so often drenched her cheeks, but tears of release, of something loosening inside her. When the prayer ended, she felt lighter. Not entirely free, the cravings still pulsed faintly beneath her skin, but lighter. As if the chains had loosened, even if they had not fully fallen away. She looked at him then, truly looked, and for the first time she did not see temptation. She saw safety. Days turned into weeks, and Elena kept returning. Not out of infatuation, though she admired his strength, but because he was the first man who did not see her as prey. Their conversations were not about bodies, but about wounds. Not about sin, but about healing. He never pretended it would be easy. Deliverance, he told her, is both a moment and a journey. God can set you free in an instant, but he often walks with you through the shadows, so you'll learn to lean on him, not just the miracle. Those words sank deep. For years she had begged for instant deliverance. When none came, she assumed she was abandoned. Now, for the first time, she began to imagine that her journey was not proof of God's absence, but of his patience. Still, the shadows lingered. Some nights she still woke trembling, the old cravings surging back like waves against a fragile wall. Sometimes she stumbled, gave in to fleeting desires, only to drown in regret afterward. But she no longer carried the shame alone. She confessed to him honestly, and he never turned away. "Each fall is not the end," he told her once. "It's another step in your climb. Don't measure yourself only by your hunger. Measure yourself by your returning." It was in those words that Elena found hope. Not a perfect hope, not the illusion that she would never struggle again, but a real one. A hope that maybe she was not cursed after all. One evening, during a small group meeting, she caught herself smiling. Not the forced smile she wore to hide her turmoil, but a real, unguarded smile. For a moment, she felt something she had almost forgotten existed, peace. And in that peace, a question stirred in her. What if freedom is not the absence of desire, but the presence of love? It was a question she did not yet know how to answer. But it was enough to plant a seed. The man of compassion had not given her deliverance in the dramatic sense she once craved. But he had given her something greater. The glimpse of a different way of living. A way where she was not defined by her curse, her past, or her failures, but by her capacity to be loved and to love in return. For Elena, it was the first step out of shadows, not the end of her struggle, but the beginning of a journey toward something deeper than flesh. The curse of 12 still whispered. The ghost years still echoed. The pastor's fall still haunted her. But now, for the first time, there was a voice louder than them all, a voice of compassion, calling her not into shame, but into healing. And she could not ignore it. For days after the prayer with the man of compassion, Elena walked as though she carried a new spirit inside her. The fire that had once raged uncontrollably now felt subdued, like embers that glowed but no longer consumed. She woke each morning with something she had not felt in years: hope. But hope, she soon learned, was not the same as freedom. The cravings did not vanish. They lurked at the edges of her mind, waiting. Sometimes they came softly, like a whisper when she was alone. Other times they struck like a storm, sudden, overwhelming, impossible to ignore. One night, weeks after her first prayer with him, she awoke drenched in sweat, her body pulsing with the old hunger. She clenched her fists, prayed desperately, but the fire spread. It was as though the curse had only been sleeping, waiting for a moment to rise. By morning, she was exhausted, angry at herself. Hadn't she been prayed for? Hadn't God touched her? Why was she still the same? She dragged herself back to the small church, her face clouded with shame. He met her at the door, the same steady kindness in his eyes. "I thought it was gone," she whispered. "But it's still here. I'm still the same." He shook his head gently. "You are not the same, Elena. You've begun a journey. Freedom is not always the absence of struggle. Sometimes it's the strength to walk through it." His words comforted her, but they also frightened her. She had dreamed of a clean break, of waking up one day completely free. To think that her struggle might remain, that it might always be with her, was unbearable. That night, she sat by her window, staring out at the city lights. "Am I cursed?" she murmured. "Or am I just weak?" The shadows lingered in other ways too. She found herself haunted by memories of the ghost years, by faces she could not fully recall, by the pastors she had drawn into her hunger. Sometimes when she closed her eyes, she heard Michael's words again. "There's something wrong with you." They echoed louder in her weakest moments. And though she trusted the man of compassion more than anyone else, a part of her still feared that he too would one day look at her with the same disgust, the same recoil. How long before he tired of her confessions? How long before he too stumbled? The fear gnawed at her. She began pulling back from him, testing the edges of his patience. She missed appointments, avoided his calls, showed up late to prayer sessions. But each time, when she finally faced him, he remained the same patient, steady, without judgment. "Why don't you give up on me?" she blurted one evening, her frustration boiling over. He looked at her with quiet sadness. "Because God hasn't given up on you. And neither should you." She turned away, tears stinging her eyes. She wanted to believe him. But the shadows were loud, and sometimes compassion felt too fragile to fight them. In her private hours, she wrestled with meaning. If her body craved endlessly, was that her true identity? If her fire was part of her nature, was she fighting a war that could never be won? What did freedom even look like, the absence of desire, or the ability to channel it into something deeper? She began journaling, filling pages with questions. Is this who I am, or what I fight? Am I cursed, or simply unloved? If God made me, why did he make me this way? Some nights the questions drowned her. Other nights they felt like the first honest prayers she had ever spoken. One evening after service, a woman from the congregation approached her. She was older, gentle, with the kind of smile that came from years of both joy and sorrow. "You remind me of myself," the woman said softly. Elena blinked. "Of yourself?" The woman nodded. "I used to believe I was cursed too. I thought I'd never be free. But I learned something: freedom isn't always about what leaves you. Sometimes it's about what you hold on to. For me, it was God's love." Elena swallowed hard. The words pierced because she wanted desperately to believe them. But part of her still clung to the idea that until the fire vanished, she was doomed. The shadows, it seemed, did not leave easily. Yet even in the shadows, a shift was happening. Slowly, imperceptibly, Elena was changing. When the cravings came, she did not always give in. Some nights she resisted, even if it meant lying on the floor, weeping, until sleep finally overtook her. Other nights she stumbled, but where once she would have drowned in shame, she now returned more quickly to prayer, to confession, to trying again. It was not victory, not yet. But it was growth. She began to notice little things: how her heart softened during worship, how her smile came more easily, how she could sit through a service without bitterness. She even started volunteering, helping with the choir, cleaning the benches after gatherings. It was not about impressing anyone. It was about belonging. For the first time in years, she felt like part of something that did not demand her body in return. The man of compassion noticed too. "You may not see it," he told her one evening, "but you are healing. Slowly, yes. Imperfectly, yes. But healing." Elena wanted to believe him, and sometimes when the light was strongest, she did. Still, the shadows lingered. There were nights when the loneliness screamed so loudly that she almost ran back to the old life, the ghost years, the fleeting embraces, the numbness that followed. There were mornings she looked in the mirror and saw not progress but failure. But the difference now was this: she was no longer walking alone. And though she still feared the curse, still wrestled with the fire, still questioned whether she was weak or unloved, she began to sense faintly, hesitantly, that perhaps her journey was leading her towards something beyond flesh. The question that had stirred weeks earlier returned with greater force. What if freedom is not the absence of desire, but the discovery of love? It terrified her, but it also gave her hope. The shadows still lingered, but so did compassion. And between the two, Elena's story was still unfolding. Elena stood at the edge of the church courtyard one quiet evening, watching children play. Their laughter echoed into the cooling air, rising above the smell of roasted corn from a nearby vendor. She found herself smiling not out of force, not out of habit, but from something real. It startled her. For so long, joy had been foreign, a luxury she thought was not meant for her. Yet here it was, breaking into her without permission, like sunlight through a torn curtain. The shadows had not vanished, they still whispered, still prowled, but for the first time, light felt stronger. Weeks passed. Elena began to sense the man of compassion's prayers reaching deeper. Not as magic spells to erase her fire, but as reminders that she was more than the fire. Slowly, she stopped defining herself by the curse she thought she carried. But even as peace grew, she feared one thing above all: intimacy. To her, intimacy was the battlefield. It was where she had always lost. Flesh was fire, and fire had burned her again and again. To open herself to love felt like stepping back into a trap. Yet love, real love, began to pursue her. It came first from God in quiet moments of worship, where she felt wrapped in a presence so tender she wept without words. It came from the congregation, who welcomed her laughter, her songs, her small acts of service without suspicion. It came, most unexpectedly, from a man in the choir named Daniel. Daniel was different. He never looked at her with hunger or judgment. He spoke to her as though she were not broken, as though she were simply Elena, a woman worth listening to, worth knowing. At first she resisted. She kept her walls high, laughed off his kindness, told herself he would eventually see the fire and run. But Daniel was patient. He spoke with gentleness, never pressing too far, never making her feel trapped. He simply stayed. One evening after rehearsal, he walked with her toward the bus stop. "You sing with such feeling," he said. She shook her head. "No, I sing because it's the only way I know to quiet myself." He smiled. Maybe that's what feeling really is, giving voice to what words can't carry. The simplicity of his answer unsettled her. She wanted to argue, to hide, but instead she found herself silent, warmed by something she had no name for. Still, the battle raged inside her. Every time Daniel's kindness drew her closer, the shadows hissed. "He'll only want your body. That's all men ever want. You will fail again." One night, she broke down in prayer. "God, I can't do this. I can't open my heart. If I try, I'll be swallowed again. Please, if love is real, teach me how to see it." She wept until she fell asleep. In her dream, she saw a burning torch. She feared it at first, thinking it was her curse, the same fire that consumed her. But as she looked closer, she realized the flame was not wild. It was steady, controlled, a light that guided instead of destroyed. When she awoke, her heart pounded with a realization. Maybe the fire was never meant to be her enemy. Maybe it was meant to be transformed. Elena began to shift. When the cravings came, she no longer only begged for them to vanish. Instead, she prayed, "Lord, show me where to place this fire. Teach me to love as you love." It was not easy. Some nights were still battles. But slowly, she noticed something remarkable. Her energy, once swallowed by shame and secrecy, began to flow outward. She invested more in the choir, in helping the children's group, in listening to women who came to her with their own hidden struggles. Her fire was becoming fuel. The man of compassion noticed. "You're learning to love," he said one afternoon. "Not with flesh, but with spirit. That is the freedom you've been searching for." His words sank deep. Freedom was not the absence of desire. Freedom was the redirection of it away from hunger, toward wholeness. In time, her friendship with Daniel grew. He never rushed her, never demanded what she could not give. Instead, he offered presence. And in that presence, Elena began to believe something she once thought impossible. that she could be loved not for her body, not despite her wounds, but simply for being herself. One evening, they sat outside after choir practice, watching the moonlight shimmer across the rooftops. Daniel turned to her and asked softly, "Elena, do you ever believe God made you for more than the pain you've carried?" Tears filled her eyes. "I want to believe it," she whispered. He reached for her hand, not forcefully, not lustfully, just a gentle touch. "Then start there. Believe it. And let love grow slowly, like a seed." Her heart trembled. For once, intimacy did not feel like fire. It felt like peace. The journey was not over. Elena knew the shadows might always linger, waiting for moments of weakness. But now she also knew this. She was no longer alone, no longer cursed, no longer defined by hunger. She was being remade. Her body still carried desire. But her soul was discovering love that was not chained to flesh. A love that flowed from God, from compassion, from patience, from community. A love that whispered, "Asterisk, you are not broken. You are becoming, asterisk." And in that whisper, Elena finally found the freedom she had long sought. Not the freedom of absence, but the freedom of transformation. The fire within her no longer consumed, it illuminated. And with that light, she began to walk into a new tomorrow. Thank you for taking your time to watch this video. Tell us what you think about Elena's experience and deliverance. If you enjoy our videos, please take a moment to follow. Subscribe to our channel to stay updated on our upcoming stories. Thank you.